This is the month of April, and in the month of April, we're doing something a bit different at Vintage because I kind of felt in the Lord that as I was praying that we needed to take a bit of a time out from our normal routine for me to do what our team calls Gare does a Papa Smurf moment, which is we kind of look at how we're doing as a church community. Look what God is doing, where is he taking us? There's some questions like, hey, Gare, what about this? What about that? And so there seems to be an opportunity to talk some family business a bit and to give an update of how we're doing as a church and where we're going. And so if you're visiting today, then this is a bit different, but this is also an opportunity to see what it's like as the family of God. We're not a congregation, we're not a conference every Sunday, we're a family out on journey together with Jesus. And last week, we looked at what it's like to grow as a church with some growing pains around family. Growing pains of family. We said last week that Vintage as a community, we've grown a lot the last year, about 30 to 40% growth. Our kids are overflowing, youth is overflowing, our missions to the city is overflowing. We've gone from, I think, 20 midweek groups to now over 80 or 90 midweek. Things are going so well. There's lots of beautiful growth. But with growth comes growing pains. And one of those pains is, oh my word, it feels, I can't connect as easily anymore. It seems to be a bit more busy on a Sunday. I can't see the same people. I hope we don't lose family. And so we looked last week at what it means to grow but maintain family. Not to grow out of being a family where we belong here at Vintage. So if you weren't here last week, I'd really encourage you to listen to that because we're committed to being a family here at Vintage. The other question I get a lot, which is a great question, and I've had it a lot the last few weeks as I've been talking to some folks, they've said, Gare, it's great that Vintage is a safe place for people who've been hurt by the church, maybe got questions, but what about discipleship? What about growth? What about discipleship? It's a great question. When Lizzie and I started Vintage Church back in 2011, we've always had a heart for both people who are exploring Jesus and following. So often in the church, we can concentrate on one area. It's called, you may have heard this before, seeker-sensitive church, where most church is designed for people who are exploring. And then you have people, we're all about discipleship. We are really about helping people grow in Jesus. And often in the church in America, churches tend to pick one or the other. But that has never been our heart. A bit because we see that in Jesus, and we want to be like him, but also our own story of being people who remember what it was like to be far from Jesus, to people who want to grow in him and become more like him. My own story, as you know, is I grew up in church, and yet I left the church in my 20s because of some deep church hurt. I hated church. I wanted to go nowhere near it. In fact, if someone invited me, I'd say, no way am I going to church. I had a proper job, not this job. I had a proper job, a real job back then, and in London, and I was in business and law stuff, and all through my 20s, it was like, church. And yet deep down, I knew that what culture had to offer, the pursuit of leisure, pleasure, treasure, was not satisfying the deepest needs of my soul. And yet I was actually petrified of going to church. I thought they would be judgmental, shaming, hypocritical. And so I avoided it at all cost. And maybe that's what you're like today, and so thankful that you're here, and so you are blessed today. But it took me going to a church that actually made a specific intention for me to be welcome. The people who had the tough questions, the people who'd been burnt, the people who wasn't fully convinced yet, the people like me who had scientific questions. And often I found church was not safe for people like me. And so it took a church experience to be radically different to what I had experienced before to welcome me back. I found a church in London who I was dragged along with the promise of good-looking girls, and I went to church, and And I found a church that welcomed me with all my dysfunctions, questions, hurts, the problems. And I was welcomed in. And at Vintage, we feel the heart of God for those who don't know him. We feel that heart so much, of like a father who longs for his children to come back home. And we'll do everything to try and make a space available for them to be loved and to be helped as they explore Jesus. But that should never mean that we don't also be passionate about growing in Jesus. The reason why I was hurt by the church is because the church wasn't like Jesus. That Jesus does not hurt people. He heals people. And so we've always had a commitment to be a church that as we grow, we always are growing without compromising, either helping people who are exploring and discipling people who are following. And so this week and next week, I want to kind of give an update on what that means for us as a community, particularly around discipleship. Many people said, okay, Gabe, but what's that going to look like? Is that all on Sundays? Is that in other venues? You know, you seem to concentrate on this, but what about that? What about the controversial issues? What about those stuff? Are you just avoiding that? And the answer will be clear over the next 2 weeks. But I think there seems to be a moment to go, as we grow, not only do we not want to lose family, but we also want to grow deep in discipleship as we grow and as we welcome people far from Jesus. Because after all, to make disciples is our core calling. In Matthew 28, it's on the screen here, in Matthew 28, Jesus says to his disciples, well, it says, then Jesus came to them and said to his disciples, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you to the end of the age. Our calling is to make disciples. As we know, we've looked a lot over the last couple of years through the great teaching of John Mark of what it means actually to be a disciple. It's not just to believe a library of knowledge and then go to heaven. It's actually to follow Jesus. The word disciple is less a student in a university classroom just downloading knowledge or reading Cliff Notes, but it's an apprentice becoming like your teacher. So it's more of a workshop environment than a classroom environment. When Jesus says, follow me, he has an agenda for your life, which is transformation. And it's a beautiful transformation. It's really a transformation of healing. Healing away from the brokenness, the insecurities, the anxieties, the being disconnected from God as our Father. Following Jesus is to be reconnected into a relationship with God and therefore be healed from the inside out. A rabbi, when he would call someone to be a disciple, would have an agenda in 3 particular directions. Number 1 is to be with the rabbi, to have a relationship. So we're called to have a relationship with Jesus, to be with Jesus. We have a slide up on the screen, I think, here. There it is. To be with Jesus. That our goal here is to reconnect people to their Creator. Not as an intellectual exercise, but an experiential one. A personal relationship with God. We're not here for a book study. We're not here for just a new way of living, new habits, new exercises. But at the core of it is we are reattached to our Father in heaven. And through that attachment, we then are transformed. We're healed from the inside out. And in that healing, the second goal of being an apprentice of Jesus is to be like him. Is to be transformed away from the anxiety, the anger, the temper, the frustrations, the greed, all these things that we bury and don't kind of say that we have, but we know we do. This is not who God created us to be, but to be healed from the inside out, that we may take on the moral character of Jesus, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. To be like him in our relationships, in all that we do. And then thirdly is to actually be sent out and do the things that Jesus did. To actually be Jesus to others. To be Jesus in word and in deed. To fight for justice, to bring healing to others, to bless, to forgive. To be Jesus for the sake of others. This is what it means to be invited into the discipleship journey. There is an agenda for you. So often in our spiritual kind of experience, we've been maybe told to become a Christian is to believe a set of doctrines and get your ticket to heaven. And then just carry on as normal until you get there. Maybe pop in to church every now and again and help on the parking team. But that's not the invitation of Jesus. That's part of it. Is actually to believe in Jesus as God and who he is and what he's done for you. But then to follow him and to be transformed into the people he created us to be. Dallas Willard summarizes this invitation from Jesus as discipleship as the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. This is the hope, the dream. And oh my word, when I came to Jesus, I was full of all sorts of brokenness. I was full of all sorts of stuff I wish I was gone. I wanted to be reconnected with God in relationship, but I also wanted to be something different that on January 1st, we always write these resolutions and we never quite could white knuckle it to achieve. Transformation, intimacy, and purpose and significance in life is what God has for you as an individual. But you as an individual are not the end goal of discipleship. We live in such an individualistic culture that we can even be a disciple apart from others, which is an oxymoron when it comes to following Jesus. Because your maturity is actually for the sake of others. When the Apostle Peter was describing what the church is, what it means to be a community of disciples, he writes this in chapter 2, on verse 9. He says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." I think if he was writing to Los Angelinos, he would say, once you were individuals, but now you are the family of God. That we are a family. The whole point of coming into relationship with God, Paul writes, is that you're adopted into the family. You are now no longer by yourself. You have brothers and sisters to journey with. That we are part of the family of God. And Peter says, we are to be a holy people. Like the end goal of discipleship is not a discipled you, but a discipled family. I won't ask you to raise your hands right now, but how many, you would think, if I asked this question, lots of hands would go up in the room. How many of you grew up in a pretty dysfunctional family? Yeah, people can't help but raise their hands. Look at that. I don't care whether you said no. Oh, yes, it's me. Right. We know it's dysfunctional because we have deep down that it should not be this way. That we have an echo of the family of God in all of us going, a place of love and forgiveness, of grace and otherliness, where we don't bite each other's heads off, but we seek to understand, where we don't check out, but we actually engage in beautiful conflict resolution, where we serve one another. All of these things that we know, actually the life of Jesus. What would the life of Jesus look like when it's a community? That's the heartbeat of God. From Genesis 1 all the way through to the coming of Jesus was God's plan to create his family and for you to play a part in that. It's why it's impossible to be a disciple on your own. How could you love others by yourself? How could you forgive others with no one to forgive? How could you help each other if there's no one to help? We're a family. John Tyson in one of his books somewhere, I can't remember when, but he's coming to speak on manhood with us, which I'm very, very excited about. Said, in a community of Christ, we're transformed together, where we all have a transformed mind. We believe what Jesus believed. Transformed characters. We become like Jesus. Transformed relationships. Love as Jesus loved. Transformed practices. Live as Jesus lived. Transformed service. Minister as Jesus ministered. Transformed influence. Lead in the city, in our workplace, as Jesus led. The community of God is a transformed community. It's why some theologians of the past used to refer to the church as God's alternative society on earth. Jesus put it like this. He said, we are a city on a hill. He said, you are salt and light to those around you, like a city on a hill. In other words, he's saying, you're kind of like a city within a city. Like you have dual citizenship in Los Angeles. You are Los Angelinos. But you're also citizens of God's family. And therefore, you live in this duality, where actually the role of the church is to model God's family to the city around you. We are God's alternative society. I love Los Angeles. It's a global city, and I love global cities. Lizzie and I have lived in quite a few of them, and we are citizens of global cities. I think more than citizens of a particular country. She's from Australia, I'm from England. We're now Americans. And we love Los Angeles because of its global nature. We love that we can go down Sawtelle, and we feel like we're in kind of enjoying little Tokyo. This is amazing. Best ramen in the world. Best burgers as well. Where'd that come from? Japan's killing it on the burgers. It's amazing. Right? Plan check down there, and then all you go down, and best desserts. I mean, anyway, I love little Tokyo. And then I go to Terangeli's over the 405. Oh my word, that falafel and hummus is off the hook. Right? And then I go down to K-Town. Man, someone took me to Parks, Korean barbecue. Have you been to Parks? Anybody been to Parks? It is amazing, right? I love that we get to taste different cultures. It's like these little territories around the city are dual citizenship. You walk into that area and go, I know I'm in Los Angeles still, right? I can see the road signs. I can see the sunshine. I can see, I know I'm in LA, but I also feel like I'm tasting something of a different country right now. And in many ways, that is what the Church of Jesus Christ is to be. We're in Santa Monica. And yet, Santa Monica is to look at us and go, but you guys are different. That we're living the life of Jesus together. That when people come in, they go, this is an alternative way of doing life. This is not Los Angeles. We love Los Angeles. We're not against Los Angeles at all. We do not have an oppositional nature to our city. We have a loving nature saying, do you want to taste what the life of Jesus is like? Not through just me speaking on Sunday, but come into the community and taste and see what Jesus is like. That people come in and go, you guys do dating differently here. It's not driven by lust and hookups. It's driven by other-centered love. It's driven by preferring the other. It's driven by different connections than just our bodily immediate desires. Wow, you guys do marriage differently here. You guys don't uncouple when the mutual contract doesn't seem to be working anymore. But you take seriously that healthy, beautiful relationships are formed through sticking together through covenant and unconditional commitment. Wow, you guys do singleness here. You could be single here as a cherished alternative way of living as you follow Jesus and not be alone because you're swept up into the family of God. Wow, you guys do enemies differently. You kind of love and forgive your enemies. This is different. And on and on and on. See, this is why discipleship is so important, because we are to give a sample of Jesus to our city through how we live together. Discipleship is for the sake of our city. That's why there is no false dichotomy between evangelism and discipleship, because good discipleship is good evangelism. The early church exploded, not because of its teaching from the pulpit, but because the different way of living of the family of God to the culture around them. There was something different. Tim Keller writes this. He says, one reason was that Christians were ridiculed. So this is the growth and the opposition to the church in the first century. One reason behind all of this was that Christians were ridiculed as too exclusive and different, and yet many were drawn to Christianity because it was different. If a religion is not different from the surrounding culture, if it does not critique and offer an alternative to it, it dies because it's seen as unnecessary. If Christians today were also famous for and marked by so-called chastity, generosity, justice, multi-ethnicity, and peacemaking, would it not be compelling today to many? We are called to be the family of God in the city. Now, we can't control the outcome of that. And Tim Keller hints that when you are the people of God in the city, sometimes you'll compel others, but sometimes you'll repel others. When I used to work in business, I had a prayer every day of going into my job, and my prayer was this: Lord, it's on the screen here. Lord, help me be a compelling curiosity. Let me be a compelling curiosity, that I'm living the way of Jesus in such a way that people go, you're different. And hopefully that difference would not be repelling, but it would be compelling. Help me treat my clients in a way that is different, the way Jesus would treat my clients. Help me treat my shareholders the way Jesus would treat my shareholders. Let me actually launch new products in the way that Jesus would launch a product. Let me do advertising in the way that Jesus would do advertising. Let me live out the ways of Jesus through my vocation. And I pray it would be a compelling curiosity. That people would go, what is it about you? Now, sometimes it would be compelling. Sometimes it was repelling. I remember getting my team really angry one day because I wouldn't lie. I just wouldn't lie. And they came to love me for it because I used to say to people, hey, if I lie to clients, that means you will never trust me because I may lie to you in the future. But I wouldn't lie. And then they actually had a little competition. Let's try and trap Gare into lying. That was like the competition around the workplace. But it was just this sense of we are called to be different. It's not just head knowledge about discipleship, we're called to be transformed into people that look like Jesus, smell like Jesus, do the things that Jesus did, that the city go, you guys are strange. And our prayer is, but there's something beautiful about that strangeness. Because I still remember what it was like not to have Jesus. And the life of the people of God was for me really compelling. Because I was living a life full of stress and anxiety, trying to make much of myself in the insecurity of just me, myself, and I. And I looked at the people of God and go, what is it about them that they are not actually anxious like I am? What is it about them that they're not actually like this? What is it? There's something about that which we need. And of course, that is the truth. We are designed to be connected to God through Jesus. And life just doesn't work without him. Discipleship is for the sake of the city, that we become a compelling alternative community, living out the ways of Jesus, that people come and taste and see that the Lord is good. But the question is, okay, Gerd, that's fine, but how do we do it? How on earth do we do it? Because Sundays seem to be focused on this, or midweek I just don't understand. How are we going to be that intoxicatingly, beautifully intoxicating alternative society of heaven on earth? How do we be little heaven down the road from little Tokyo? Well, Dallas Willard was right when he said this on the screen. He said, every church needs to be able to answer 2 questions. First, what is our plan for making disciples? And second, does our plan work? Right? And so we want to be faithful to Jesus saying, go and make disciples. So what is our plan to be that alternative society? To invite people into the healing love of Jesus and be transformed into his image and together be the community of Jesus for the sake of the city. Well, you'll be pleased to know that over the last few months, we've been really praying about what is that plan. And we've got together, Johnny and I and Alyssa and the wider team, and we've had lots of help from John Mark and others about what is that plan. And you'll be pleased to know we have a plan we want to tell you, and so next week we'll tell you the plan. Because today, I want to go through a few of the principles behind the plan. Because I think we have to get clear on these are the principles of discipleship before we say this is our plan. And because all of you are committed to weekly gatherings of worship, we'll see you next week. Awkward. But I'm in Tahoe next week. Anyway, okay, number 1. We're committed to discipleship always involving and including evangelism. We're committed to that. Jesus did not say, go and evangelize and then make disciples. He said, go and make disciples. Because discipleship is starting with people far from him and welcoming them and loving them with their questions and their hurts. There is no dichotomy, which is this slide is normally how we feel about evangelism, which is telling people about Jesus, and discipleship. And normally, people go, choose one or the other. You can't be a great church, a great community, helping people explore Jesus and discipleship. You have to choose. We refuse to make that choice. We see discipleship as both exploring and following. And so as we grow together, there's going to be tensions there, of course. But we want to actually grow as a community that helps the exploring and grows the following. Secondly, discipleship is counter-formation. We stole this phrase from John Tyson. I'm sure he stole it from someone else. But we all just steal stuff. I do anyway. Discipleship is counter-formation. What that means is we recognize that we are not discipling people with a clean slate. How many of you know, like me, you come to Jesus already discipled in other things? And then every week we're discipled by culture in certain things. I used to be in marketing. There's an ideology behind marketing, right? It's called capitalism. It's called greed. It's called meet your felt needs, right? There's every billboard, every TV show, every TikTok reel is actually preaching at you and forming you. Right? These are the pulpits of the cultural message. And so when you come into the family of God, we recognize that, oh my gosh, I certainly come full of this preaching, and I need counter-formation, not just formation. I need people to help unwind me from things. That we actually need to be super intentional, where 1 hour on a Sunday won't cut it. 1 hour on a Sunday won't be anywhere near what is needed to unwind what we're already formed with by 10 hours per day. I mean, just think of what these do to us. Just think of the TV show. Just think of driving in our cars isolated. Just think of the message of profit and the message of consumerism, materialism, individualism. These are the messages being preached to us every day, and they're not the ways of Jesus. And yet we can't help but be affected and shaped by them. And so we recognize when we come with, what are we going to do? It can't just be great. Sunday has to bear the burden for all of that. We recognize there's going to be a multiple array of things of we need to actually enter into counter-formational practices of going, you know what? There's going to be a time of the week where I don't have this anymore, and I just go, ugh, get rid of that. Oh no, your phone, Gare, your phone. right? It's like, you're so upset for me right now that I might have broken my best friend. We have to actually be really intentional about this, as Bonhoeffer once put it, as he was discipling young men in the brutal time of Germany in the 30s. This, what we're doing, must be stronger than what our youth are being discipled by over here. So therefore, we recognize that our plan isn't just, hey, an hour on Sundays. Our discipleship needs to be more intentional with what Jesus did. Actually, I think you're going to need 3 communities in your life to be shaped into the ways of Jesus. The first is probably a core group of maybe 3 or 4 people to be vulnerable with, to confess with. Then you're going to need a wider group, maybe 15, 20, to do life with, to go through the seasons of life together and pray for each other, do mission together, serve one another, be there for one another, read the Bible together, worship together. Then you're going to need a bigger community like on this for all the joys of the bigger fellowship of Christ. We're going to actually be intentional and invite you into these things with the risk that if you only come on Sundays, you will be saying to me, Gare, what about discipleship? Because I'll go, yeah, have you experienced what we're doing? But if you only come on Sundays, you're going to feel I'm not being discipled. You're absolutely right. Because Jesus had different venues for different types of discipleship. Sometimes he brought Peter, James, and John together and said, guys, I want to have a chat. Sometimes you just got the 12 together. Hey, lads, want to have a chat. Sometimes you got the 72. All right, 72, you guys are going out on mission today. Sometimes you got the crowd. Different venues. That's why we have focus. See, focus is not just for funsies. I used to be in marketing. There's going to be things we talk about at Focus that we won't talk about on Sundays, right? The family dinners that we hold, there's going to be things there we talk about we don't talk about at Focus on Sundays. In your communities, we can't do things there we can do things there we can't do on Sundays. We have to embrace the whole ecosystem of discipleship. Okay, thirdly, discipleship is not a formula. Most of us, when we come to discipleship plans, how are we going to do discipleship? Most of us have what I call silver bullet, which is, well, it's clearly more this, right? Because we take the one thing that we've really had a special connection with Jesus on and go, that should be it for everyone all the time, right? So it could be Bible study. I love Bible study. Bible study is always, the Word of God is precious. But sometimes the answer is just more Bible study. But Jesus said to the Pharisees, hey, you guys know the Bible backwards, but you're far from me, right? So I grew up in the kind of the Pentecostal tradition, where transformation and becoming a disciple was less about Bible study and more about encounter moments, right? Being zapped by the Holy Spirit. And we saw people having incredible encounters with the Holy Spirit and miracles. I remember seeing miracles before my eyes. But I left that church eventually because it felt so hurtful as a community. They weren't really like Jesus, even though they saw Jesus do some stuff. Then you will have one that you go, yeah, okay, it's not that, it's this, right? It's mentorship, right? We need mentors. Oh, it's prophetic ministry, right? Oh, it's mission. If everyone just went on mission, that's where you'll grow. Now, hear me saying, none of that is wrong. I'm just saying we can't reduce it to one. That actually our discipleship plan has to go, Holy Spirit, you are just going to use it all. And therefore, we can't just reduce something to one thing, but together, like a good cocktail or mocktail, is an ingredient, different ingredients. That's the Holy Spirit. Takes the truth of Jesus, puts us into community to live it out together, takes us on mission to see it in practice, has other people mentor us into that. There's all this beautiful thing, and you never know when God's going to go, when you feel that change within you. I've changed a lot. I know you're saying I've got a long way to go. You're absolutely right. But I've changed a lot, and I look back, and sometimes it's been reading the Bible. Oh my gosh, God has met me. Sometimes it's been in the context of worship, and I've just felt the presence of God. Sometimes it's been on a mission trip. Sometimes it's been through pain and suffering. Sometimes it's been through a word of knowledge of prophetic ministry. Sometimes it's been through actually just a word of wisdom from someone. Sometimes it's through my wife, right? Through other people. Our discipleship is not just silver bullet discipleship, which is why now there's a danger here when we come to the plan, which means, oh my gosh, does that mean we're going to do a million things? No, what it means is when we have places of community, we do different things in that community. So our vintage communities are places of Bible study, places of worship, places of prayer, places of mission, places of doing the practices of Jesus together, practices of silence and solitude, practices which are often overlooked. Finally, almost, discipleship takes time and cannot be microwaved. It takes time. Now, sometimes we are looking at ourselves and going, oh, I wish I could get over this. God, help me, help me. And sometimes it just feels like a long obedience in the same direction, as Eugene Peterson once wrote a book about. And sometimes we look at other people and go, oh my gosh, I just wish you would change. You don't get it. That's not the way of Jesus. And sometimes we impose the way of Jesus onto people, but that never works. It always has to come from a personal transformation on the inside. Now, there's a bit of both sometimes, but we can't rush discipleship, which means the family of God is a beautiful exercise in patience with each other, right? It's a beautiful journey of grace and forgiveness with each other, and it's a refusal to force someone to be at a place where God hasn't yet brought them to. We can encourage them, help them, come into their lives and pray and really help them, but we can't force it. Forceful discipleship only hurts. And this is the way of Jesus. I find it incredible that one of the apostles called Peter, one of the disciples called Peter, Jesus said to him, Peter, you're amazing. I'm going to build my church on you. This is unbelievable. You're like one of the leaders here. And then Jesus died and was resurrected, and then the church started, and Peter started to preach. And then for years, Peter was only preaching to the Jewish community. It took a vision, in Acts chapter 10, you can go read it, it took a vision for Peter to finally, the penny to drop, that, oh my gosh, the good news is not just for the Jewish community, but for the whole world. You'd have thought he'd know that already. Do you know what I mean? You would have thought hanging out with Jesus for 3 years, that would have sunk in. You would have thought Jesus, when he says, I'm going to build my church on you, would have made sure Peter got that. Just shows you the grace of Jesus in slowly growing us. One step at a time. Whereas we get frustrated with each other for where we're not, Jesus celebrates how far we've come. And we give patience to go one step at a time. And then finally, discipleship is about disciple making. Jesus said to disciples, go and make disciples. He did not say, go and get someone else to disciple you. Most people come to me and go, Gare, when is Vintage going to disciple me? I go, that's a great question. It's just not the Jesus question. Because Jesus says, go make disciples. In other words, your growth is when you're involved in helping other people grow. Jesus' primary way of you growing is not sitting under the amazing mentorship of Roland down here, or Johnny down here, or Fiona over here. That is helpful. But your best growth, where Jesus says, now we're doing this, is when you go, okay, God, use me to help grow others. You go, hang on a minute, Gare, but I'm like really immature. Well, you all are, bro. You'll never make it to be kind of, now I'm ready. There's always someone you can come alongside and help grow. And so next week, we're going to look at opportunities for you to make disciples of others as a means of you growing and becoming more like Jesus yourself. Discipleship is disciple making. Ephesians, in Paul's letter, and landing the plane now, in Ephesians, Paul writes, my job and Johnny's job and John Mark's job and other people's jobs is not to disciple, but to equip you guys to do the works of ministry. And that's our job, is to raise you up. So next week, we're going to look at what it means to be a community and how do we get there radically like Jesus. To be a community that is richly for people who are far from Jesus, who've got questions, not too sure, maybe been hurt by the church, but also help people go all the way to come under his leadership, to come under his kingship, and actually together as a community be an alternative society in LA, where people come in and go, you guys are different, but there's something beautiful. And we can whisper to them, it's not us. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Would you like to meet him? Let's stand together.